Welcome to this session, Generation YouTube, a challenge to the MSM. My name's Ollie Foster. I am a broadcast journalist by trade. I've worked in broadcast for most of my life, and I have loads and loads of opinions about the mainstream media, but Callum very sensibly asked me to chair so you won't be subjected to them. So on my right is Callum Brees, who is a freelance writer. On my left is Baroness Stowell, who's a Conservative peer in the House of Lords and former head of corporate affairs at the BBC. And on my far left, not politically, I hasten to add, is Maya Toosey, who is himself a YouTuber. Callum.
Well, I personally think that the YouTube is a threat to the mainstream media. And when I do think about YouTube, when I first encountered it, I always thought it was just people uploading videos such as Charlie Bit My Finger and just fat nerds singing to Maya Mahi. But I have noticed a growing trend and new media starting in YouTube, particularly what I like to follow are travel bloggers like Bold and Bankrupt, Peter Sentinello and Indigo Traveller, who go to often communities in the world which I think are poorly represented by the media, and they try and sort of offer a more humanistic approach to their own media narrative, and it does prove a threat to the mainstream media. And to really see this sort of warfare between mainstream media and YouTube, I look at instances like with PewDiePie. For those who don't know who PewDiePie is, he's a Swedish YouTuber who plays video games and reacts to memes for a living. You know, he put on a satirical news bulletin where his viewerships outweighed all of the mainstream media, at least the American mainstream media outlets combined. So that's clear to me that YouTube is posing a threat to mainstream media, but however, there is also growing pressures from the mainstream media to try and clamp down on independent creators, bringing in demonetization policies, clamping down on free speech, and trying to bring in this stifling conformity. However, although that there is a clear trying to clamp down on these independent creators, I do think that this kind of snobbishness coming from the mainstream media, I think a new media will flourish, and I do feel like it will grow in numbers in the near future. But yeah, I'll be more interested to hear what you guys have to say and what my other panelists table.
Under 2 minutes. Right, Baroness Tina Stowell.
Thank you very much, Ollie. I should also say that I currently chair the Communications and Digital Select Committee in the House of Lords, but I am here very much in my own capacity and only speaking for myself. So from my perspective, I think that both YouTube and the mainstream media are important, but for different reasons. And I just want to start by saying why I believe the mainstream news media is important. And I'm sort of, when I'm talking about this, I'm in my mind, I'm talking more about broadcasters than necessarily the print media, but I think that they too remain important. And the reason why they are is because in what I think most people would agree is a divided and continually fragmenting world, the MSN should act as a trustworthy source of information for all of us. And I fear and wouldn't want us here in the UK to adopt an American style of news media where you choose your channel based on your politics or your worldview. And therefore, I think the impartiality requirement for broadcasters is essential to a cohesive society. Now, that said, the likes of the BBC, Sky, and ITV don't always get this right. And indeed, the meaning of impartiality in the minds of people, in the minds of audiences, has changed. And it's moved away from something which is just defined by party politics to something a bit more nuanced. And I think people's definition of what qualifies as political is much broader, and that's been magnified since the events of 2016. Now, this debate is very much around focused on the age gap and where audiences are getting their news, but there's also evidence that other demographic groups, like those of lower socioeconomic categories, are also turning away, which brings me to YouTube. Now, I think YouTube is a fantastic innovation. I am a user and I am a fan. I think the accessibility it provides for new players to enter the market is great. I think the fact that we now have more choice and more competition for news audiences is good. particularly for those who felt that they weren't being well served by mainstream news media. They've got somewhere else for them. And I do think that the arrival of YouTube and also new channels like GB News, and I'm not just saying because I'm sat next to Ollie, are assisting in helping the traditional media up their game, but they've still got some way to go, I think. So I wouldn't want to lose that choice in competition at all. But I do think it would be a serious loss to us as a society if we went down a route where all that was available was news sites or channels which provide reassurance or comfort without the challenge of other perspectives. And I think that, you know, we must acknowledge that there's always a danger that a narrow source of comment or opinion often has no option but to become shriller or more extreme in order to maintain its audience. And I think that's what some people are concerned about if we were left with just that sort of narrow diet for people and would exacerbate and encourage further division. So I think it's important, as I say, that they are there alongside the other broadcasters. They now, however, they provide an access for those traditional broadcasters to those audiences that have moved to YouTube, and YouTube is very important to the traditional media in order to get to people that they are not serving as well as they were before, in terms of, you know, just younger people or whoever, where they might want their content, but the platform, the broadcasters need to follow them to where they are. But this is making platforms like YouTube incredibly powerful. They're, as I say, controlling the access, they're controlling the revenue that these businesses are able to generate. So I think there has to be a balance between YouTube's profit for the innovation and the risk that it undertook when it was first created, and the opportunity that it has provided ever since. But there has to be a regulatory regime so that the public interest is served in such a powerful and important arena. And that's not just about online safety, although I'm sure, like many others, I too have questions and concerns about legal but harmful in the context of adults. But it's also about ensuring that there is more of a regulatory regime than we have currently when it comes to pro-competition and antitrust. But in sum, both are important for different reasons, both need to change, but I think they are both part of our future and should be.
Thank you very much. Maya Tuzi.
Right, so interesting discussions actually so far, because as a political YouTuber, the new media are definitely challenging the mainstream media. There is definitely a pushback, and I think it's important to talk about the pushback because there is a vested interest in, of course, the actual mainstream. They don't want to lose their ground. At the same time, politicians and governments, under the pressure of course, trying to help society, they come up with, of course, advice and suggestions that end up getting platforms like YouTube making things more difficult. So we are definitely, for example, shows like mine are now one of the most watched daily news shows in the UK after the BBC. You can't beat the BBC numbers, unfortunately. But at the same time, YouTube, you would think that independent YouTubers, when it comes to this topic, political content, would be getting most of the attention. In reality, everything is becoming corporate because of the advertisers. So now, the content from your CNNs and your Sky News and all these guys, they are now being pushed by YouTube more than your independent, smaller YouTube channels, even though it's the same topic that they're talking about. Now, there is an argument to say about the bias and the echo chambers and all those areas, which already exist, but print media is obviously proving that point, but obviously we're talking about broadcast. People, we need to trust people more. We need to have more faith in humans, at least in the West, at least in this country, because we don't really have an appetite for a complete echo chamber in that sense, and there's nothing wrong with having people having the option to go listen to what kind of reaffirms their views, but at the same time, the shows that become successful, like channels like mine, I'm open about my leanings, I give the facts, then I add my opinion, then I actually tell people, you shape your own view. Don't even let me allow you to kind of form your opinion because of me. And then the feedback I get is, oh, we like you because you're unbiased. I'm not unbiased, but I know what they mean. They just don't like their dishonesty and lack of transparency. When they see certain shows on Channel 4, Sky News, that they still sell it as impartial, but clearly there's bias, they don't like that. But because I'm already honest, saying these are my leanings, these are the facts, this is my opinion, they kind of like that. And the echo chamber shows don't do well. There are so many of these rogue YouTubers, you've got the far right, far left, and all the other random ones. And they don't really create a proper base. You know, the masses, there's absolutely no appetite for that sort of thing. There's absolutely a need for certain regulations, of course, but right now we are being challenged by YouTube because a big corporation and big government going hand in hand, they can lobby at Parliament and, you know, they put the pressure on politicians in the House of Commons, for example, select committees, to say, well, we have to do something in the name of compassion. Some people might get hurt or offended, so let's tell YouTube to put a ban on certain words. When COVID happened, for the first year, we couldn't use the word COVID. I had to come up with random words, say, oh, the C word, or virus, or the lockdown situation. Whereas Sky News and BBC could talk about it all the time. You know, it's not the same as trying to stop misinformation. That's a whole different topic. But they go with blanket policy to avoid misinformation. They end up saying, well, they can't even use the word COVID. And this is the biggest problem that we're currently facing. But there is definitely a challenge, and we're looking forward to being the future.
Thank you very much. Lots to get into, and I really promised myself when I started that I wasn't going to share my own opinions, but I must just ask, the word regulation has been used quite a lot. Would anyone here advocate an unregulated media? Just quickly. Yes or no? Yes or no?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Not broadcast, no.
Yeah.
Can you just elaborate on why not broadcast?
I don't think that you know, the sort of, as I was trying to say earlier, I think the need for impartiality on our broadcast channels is one which is important and should remain. But I do think the regulation of broadcasting is having to change and adapt, because clearly in the past what drove regulation was about the scarcity of spectrum. We have a whole different world now.
Sure, but when, was it Tessa Jowell, when she set up the 2003 Communications Act, wasn't she the one that said that broadcast media was more influential than print media, and that was used as justification for regulating broadcast more than it was print? Would you share that view?
Yeah, I mean, I think broadcast media is more. It reaches more people. It is. I mean, it's something. I mean, if you know, it has more. It is more powerful in the way in which it influences people, for sure. And I think what's happened now, of course, is we've converged between traditional broadcast and the accessibility of entrance onto, you know, as broadcasters into a sort of whole new regime because of the internet. But I mean, the way in which traditional broadcasters that are available in a conventional way is not something which I would want to see introduced to the internet, for sure. But I think there are now, as I say, I think the power of the internet and the influence of that means that there has to be some form of regulation. Yeah, whether or not what is proposed right now by way of the legislation that is being brought forward is going to be perfect and is right is a whole different matter, but I don't think it should be completely unregulated.
Okay, all right, anyway, that's enough from my questions. Over to the audience.
I'm a great fan of YouTube. I watched a lot. The biggest problem is the algorithm. I sometimes think I've actually watched things I really could have watched better because I follow their algorithm, which I try not to do now. The difference seems to be that I realise you've actually got to have a wide variety, and I find far too many YouTubers say some very good things, but then they're on so much because that's their full-time job. I sometimes wish a bit more variety. Going back to mainstream media, I think diversity, really great. I wonder what passes for diversity is actually quite what you need. A lot of it, for instance, my sexuality matters. The fact I'm not conventionally wired and I've actually got no desire to be a father seems to have nothing to do with it, and you can go on like that. Maybe that is the problem with the conventional media. I mean, if you look back 10, 20 years ago, there were different items, you know, which you go on about. So I think have you look at have biases. My point is, YouTube, great, but don't follow their algorithm.
YouTube's obviously a very powerful tool to allow for the freedom of people to look at other media sources. But YouTube itself is a very controlling, woke, left-wing organization that stops people like Maya Tusi, Michael Heaver, and Andrew Walker from airing a lot of the views that they want because they have a fear they'll be cancelled by the company, be shadow banned, etc. In America, a lot of companies similar to Maya Tusi's, such as Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, have become very successful because they've built an entire company around their platform. Does the right in the British right and the American right need to create a new YouTube that allows more freedom? It centralizes all their viewers into one platform so that they can get more viewers, it's less spread out, and people they share more viewers basically, and does not give YouTube their money and time that they use to destroy and suppress freedom of speech. I've talked, for example, there is this organization started up called Nebula Plus, which is an educational version of YouTube set up by creators for creators. Does a political version need to be set up of that?
Yeah, before I came, I showed my son what sessions I was attending today, and he had a really interesting comment in this one, and he said, "I thought YouTube was mainstream media," and he was being serious because for him, it's appearing alongside Netflix and other streaming channels on the TV, and he's being serious. He wasn't being flippant. And he then went on to explain that how they were. He was quite surprised by that response. He said something really interesting. He said, "Well, they'll be wiped out by TikTok, Reels, and every other short-form video creator." But it wasn't just short-form. The lad just said that the ability to create content is the trick that YouTube have missed. So their growth rate, I then looked at this, the growth rate YouTube, 20-odd%. Growth rate at TikTok, 257%. So I think we'll be having a debate next year about whether without YouTube on the thing, it'll be another two that are being compared. Perhaps I was wondering what you thought about that.
My own viewing habits recently is that even though I have all those platforms, that Netflix, everything's built in, I find myself watching YouTube much more. And when I compare it to broadcast television, I'm finding broadcast television to be incredibly shallow in comparison, because you can get an intelligent person or a group of people debating something for an hour and a half with unadulterated shots of presenters walking to train stations and traveling along. I'm going to go speak to this world expert, and you speak to them for 3 minutes and then they're on to something else. So I'm just wondering how the mainstream media can readjust to have serious programs with real depth, and rather than the language of television developed over the years, which actually just produces something which is much more shallow.
Can I just quickly ask you, what if news programs were to essentially include more video casts, like podcasts, but filmed on the television, so they cater to your, say, YouTube appetite, but they do it on the news? Is that something that you would tune in to watch?
It's never going to happen because...
Yeah, but if it were to, was that something that would get you back to watching the telly?
The thing which I'm missing on my mainstream television, apart from the fact that the language is kind of very distracting and very kind of short, is that they don't have the courage to talk about some of the more serious issues in any kind of depth, and there's a lot of sin of omission. So I can't see how... I'd love for that to happen.
But what kind of issues do you mean?
I mean the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people walking through London, really, really frightened about lack of civil liberties, and it was reflected nowhere in our mainstream media. That sort of thing.
I was interested in the regulation point. I mean, one thing I think that would get people watching the news much more is if people just told the news, right? We've got this moment where it's a bit like whenever I'm in America, it's always really annoying because I have to watch Fox News and I have to watch CNN and MSN, and what you get is lots and lots and lots of opinion, which is fine. And if you want to take a deep dive, and there's a place for it in YouTube, that's fantastic. But actually what stopped happening is a reporting of the news. Now, obviously the refrain is, oh, well, it's all subjective, but actually if we just get the facts as they're known, then that would be really important. And I think that there's a problem with that. The other thing that needs to happen, and that's to this point, is that there needs to be more courage in getting on, and us all doing this, but broadcasters as well, is getting people whose ideas we find abhorrent, sit them down and talking to them civilly and engaging with them, because we have a problem with that in society, and we have a problem with that in broadcasting. Now, if you compare the debate around Brexit, which everyone had to have a say on because it was electoral, to the point that the gentleman's making about, I think you're making about the people that came out and protested about lockdowns, that was a key point. And my real concern is that a lot of people lose trust in things, and that's a massive issue. But if you look at things like the online safety bill, look, on the one hand, YouTube take down people like Russell Brand or whoever it is because they say it's misinformation. We now see this misinformation tag everywhere. Lots of the public think misinformation is coming from the mainstream media. And the only way you get to grips with that is to allow open, honest discussion in the tradition that I thought we had, which is the last couple hundred years of enlightenment, freedom in this country. And I would say that those gatekeepers, particularly in news and elsewhere, should take note about that, because the way that you make sure you get audiences is if that you're, people say relevant, but if you actually are able to have the courage to discuss these ideas openly and honestly, even when you get Ofcom warnings, and I think we need to see some more of that.
My question is that I think the political discourse on alternative media, you know, your YouTubers, your podcasters, political commentators, etc., they don't always stem from grassroots viewership, but sometimes still the same old corporate support that controls the mainstream narrative. You know, think about YouTube algorithms that control what gets seen in search results. So what is stopping an elite billionaire fat cat from using their wealth to thrust their own political agenda into the gap dominated by so-called grassroots independent YouTubers?
Excellent question.
I've got a very quick question. I don't know if a lot of people have noticed, but the YouTubers have noticed that they recently removed the dislike button, and they have had a lot of discourse in the YouTube community as to why that happened, on conspiracy theories, a logical explanation, an emotional one as well, whether they're trying to hide their tracks. Anyway, is you, as a panel that's talking about YouTube or has experience with YouTube, what is your personal take on such a seemingly insignificant change in the platform where that also used to be one of its defining qualities? And how do you think that's affected the platform in general?
Hey everyone, I'm a wannabe YouTuber. Madman Habs, that's what it is, to help underprivileged kids, both physically with fitness and mental health and self-development. So I noticed a lot of times people mention distrust with the mainstream media. There's a feature on YouTube, for those of you not familiar with it, you can comment, you can like, you can dislike. If someone says something stupid, not dislike now, but someone say something stupid, there's an array of people that can actually challenge it, and they voted by others, and to say what this person is saying wrong, or there's a different view. Mainstream media does not offer you that. You've got a journalist in front of you, you've got them giving you one shot, one screen, two people, 3-minute discussion and done. And that's who you're given. And so there's obviously distrust there. The second thing was the point of biases. What YouTube offers is it gives you individuals that can talk at length. So the chap over there mentioned, you know, people don't have chances to express themselves. Yes, there's a point where YouTube is regulating, but that's what YouTube offers over mainstream media. And I think us as the younger generation, we're going to be moving to those things. The old gent there, he mentioned his child doesn't even know what mainstream media is, you know, and that's what we're growing up. Whether it's TikTok, whether it's YouTube, I think YouTube with its percentages, it's stabilized. It's a mainstream thing. I always question TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. They're all fast-growing trends, and they might just drop. So it's something to think about. Maybe next year, TikTok might not be here, but YouTube will be. We'll see. So yeah, those are the main 2 points, really. And give me a follow.
Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go back to the panel for a little bit. So, Callum, anything you want to come back on? We had lots brought up there, and I particularly like the question about the dislike button, but you choose what you'd like to.
Yeah, so this idea of like diversity on YouTube, and you know there is a lot of content on YouTube and probably a bit too much, but that's what I think is great about YouTube. And I know it can be heavily regulated in some areas, and I know it's harder for independent creators, especially like young ones who have a burning desire to produce content. You know, there is a lot of diversity on YouTube, but I know we can talk about algorithms and how that makes it impossible for some YouTubers to actually, make a certain living off YouTube. I really entrust in the audience member to, expand their research and literally just do their own research, because I do feel with the mainstream media, we do get like a shallow representation that, this is the only media that you need to follow and we are telling the truth. So really it's, I really entrust in the viewer in expanding their own research and really just broadening their own horizons, just as vaguely as that. And my opinion on the dislike button, I mean, I always just see, it was a strange one, because I always thought with the dislike button, I thought that was just a choice by YouTube to get rid of it, just to, help the well-being of certain creators, really. I don't know if it does much. I mean, I don't know if it provides a really good democracy, but I did feel it was a strange decision to get rid of the dislike button whilst the like button was still there. But yeah, that's the 2 points really that I want to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Tina.
Well, I mean, I think what's come through from quite a few of the comments really is the fact that in this day and age, a lot of people want to sort of do, not just view. You want to be part of what it is that you are tuning into, not just a passive observer of it. And I think that the point about, is YouTube now the mainstream, I think is a good challenge, actually, and it is a reflection of the fact that the media landscape is changing rapidly, and that which is new very quickly then becomes very much part of the bloodstream. I mean, even something as relatively as much newer as TikTok is now used by the traditional broadcasters as a vehicle for them to also get their content to different groups of audiences that they are losing from their channels. But I do think, and I come back to what I said at the beginning, which is that I think these two worlds remain complementary. I don't think we are at a point where the sort of mainstream or the established or traditional broadcasters or news channels are redundant. But it is essential that in this world, which is changing all the time, and the pace of that change is getting quicker all the time, that they define more clearly and are able to articulate what is their role, how are they distinctive from that which is available to people on platforms like YouTube or anything else that might emerge in the future, which will offer something different. But as I say, for me, I, as much as I value and really do welcome the greater choice that is available for people through these new platforms, I don't think that it's something which, on its own, is fulfilling the sort of need as a society to have something which is available for everybody. But if it's available for everybody in the way that PSBs are and should be, they have to be much better at understanding and serving all those different audiences. And I think my final point to your question about diversity right at the start, to me, what's really important for broadcasters to understand, and I think diversity and impartiality are going increasingly hand in hand here, is that the most important diversity that they have to provide is around that diversity of perspective, worldview, outlook, and not assuming or adopting a mindset that there is a correct or an accepted position on any particular contentious thing that they should be giving more weight to over another position, because that's where they lose people's confidence and where people start to distrust them.
Maya.
Okay, so I'm just going to turn them to a few points there with all the questions. I'll be quick. First thing, there was a research that came out in 2020 from UCLA that showed that it's more likely people on YouTube to watch right-wing content and end up also watching the left-wing content in a more tolerant way. And they might still leave an angry comment, but them leaving an angry comment means that they've been watching it anyway than they did when it was TV. As Alan said, it's unlikely in America that someone watches Fox News would end up actually watching CNN. But on the new media platforms, it's more likely that happens. Secondly, YouTube is still, as you were saying, YouTube is still technically one of the better platforms comparing to all the others like your Twitters and everything else. It's still a bit more fair. But and the main problem is that you do not want to create a right-wing platform to have like people like me and the others kind of go on it. That will be the echo chamber, and that will be, there's absolutely no point. Then we're just talking to ourselves. Then there's no need for that. Credible channels on YouTube actually are now mainstream, you know, as the guy was saying, because one of the problems we have now is that TV is dead. That influence that at the time when the BBC was created and, you know, the peak of TV, yes, media had more influence. Now they don't. Actually, print media is back via social media, via your Twitter links. And people go back on your Telegraphs and your the Daily Mirrors and Daily Mails. That's where they get the actual updates from. It's not TV anymore. And in fact, some of the new TV channels that we've had in this country and in a number of other countries, with all due respect, they end up basically being expensive YouTube channels because, you know, they have unnecessary costs with the studio and all the producers and everything else. Most of the hits and views comes from the short clips on Twitter and YouTube. So because people still don't watch the shows on TV, they've got a couple of good primetime shows, obviously in the evening. The rest of it, nobody watches it. It's like 5,000, 10,000 people watch it throughout the whole day. But they get the hits, that 2-minute monologue, on Twitter, on YouTube, and that's how they get their hits. So TV is there. The new media, we are the media, and it's actually happening. But we have to make sure that we let the market decide. As you know, we got other non-political content. If it's credible enough, the market will reply. The viewers are there. If the guy is like a crazy nutter, is just going to talk about nonsense, they don't get any views. They don't become big anymore. It has happened in the past, but they used other routes. You know, if you want to talk about people like Alex Jones and others, they created their own website, you know, and they've been doing it for like about 65 years. It's not like he came out of nowhere in 15 minutes and became famous and is now dangerous. The actual new version of new media is actually challenging itself. So that's kind of the main point. But just one last thing. Impartiality keeps coming up. I think objectivity is more important than partiality. And that's where the mainstream media still fails, because humans, it's very, very hard. We can try our best, and the BBC throughout history, especially in the past, did a good enough job when it was easier with the discussions and topics. Whereas you will at some point make a mistake when it comes to impartiality. Your own subconscious bias will come out. Objectivity will fix that. You know, as long as you're objective, as long as you know you're reporting it, you can add your opinion, but you can actually even challenge yourself, your own side, you know, be your own devil's advocate. That's basically a version of impartiality. That's much better and much healthier, in my opinion.
Okay, so lots of things are coming out. I mean, there's a few contradictions that I still haven't worked out in my head from kind of the sense I'm getting from the audience and from you guys. You know, people sort of saying how we want impartial facts, we want unbiased news, but then what seems to be the thing that everyone watches is long-form opinion and podcasts. So I haven't quite squared that circle. The other point about regulation, there's lots of people here at the festival will say, I believe in free speech, no ifs, no buts, but we need to regulate the media, but we need libel laws and stuff. So again, that's another grey area I haven't figured out yet. And just on your point, Maya, you say, you know, how only short clips sell. You're absolutely right. The short, sharp, 59-second videos on Twitter are what sells, yet all I seem to hear from people is, I want depth, and I want nuance, I want long form. So again, there's very conflicting messages, and those are the sort of stalemates that I haven't quite managed to sort of, as a producer, even figure out myself. But anyway, that's just me.
I mean, I don't think that you know, that difference is necessarily, you know, wrong. As in, you know, for a lot of people, the sort of short form, quick video is a way of either just, it's an awareness raising thing, it's being able to say, oh, I know that's happening. When it comes to understanding something, people want to hear a bit more. They want to be able to hear the different arguments on either side of a matter. They like a bit of an analysis. I mean, I think long form podcasts where people get to discuss things objectively in a very mature way, which isn't sort of like, you know, a fight, you know, where people are trying to win, but actually are trying to enlighten one another, is attractive to people. And I don't think that should surprise us at all.
So I know we're going to get questions. Quick point to confirm this. Perfect example is there's definitely a need and appetite for your Joe Rogans, but there will be a few of them. You know, they don't just want to concept of long format. It has to be a few good ones. But short, actually raising awareness is very important and people want it. Right now, my background is Persian, my family are from Iran, so people like me have been pushing for all the quick updates from Iran, the protests and the uprisings. And it was actually us and from new media that pushed so much that finally the BBC and Sky are starting to talk about Iran because of all the short clips, and they still haven't done it really properly. But yeah.
I seem to remember a time when YouTube would it would suggest things to you that were maybe opposed to what you were watching. So it would suggest, alternative perspectives. And I've got this story in my head that there was this MP or something who, and I'm sure it wasn't just that particular person, who was sort of saying, "Oh, it's terrible. In my feed, I've got these far-right videos, and could YouTube please do something about it?" And I just remember thinking at the time just how disappointed I was that couldn't just been made a user choice by YouTube, that we couldn't have had a system whereby people say, "Oh, please hide content that disagrees with my views." Obviously, perhaps not phrased like that, but what do you think we should do about that?
I think I'd firstly disagree that YouTube does have a function to hide content that you aren't uninterested in, but I wonder, as people in this field and have experience, to what extent do you think content should actually be regulated? Because a large amount of people consuming content from YouTube is actually younger demographics who are more easily influenced and can and would be exposed to not only just general media sources, but also the more extreme YouTubers on both ends of the political spectrum. So what extent do you think it should be regulated? And also, I'd like to wonder about the push between longer forms of content and shorter, because I think people in younger age groups actually prefer shorter form content that instantaneously and immediately reaffirms their political opinion, as opposed, I don't think there's actually that much of a push to a spread between longer form content and shorter form content to everyone.
Thank you for all your comments today, appreciate it. I wanted to go back to the opening remarks in the panel when you mentioned COVID was restricted to be used on YouTube. The question would be, was that YouTube imposing that, or was that HMG? And if it was HMG, the question would be to the Baroness, how was censorship approved in HMG to allow that? And my overall question to the panel is why we're all here, free speech. You might tell from my accent, I'm not from around here, and my idea of what free speech in the UK is different than what I would consider free speech back at home. Over here, I would consider free speech as politically correct free speech, which is allowed, and how that affects mainstream news as well as YouTube. Thank you.
Hiya. Just a note on YouTube removing dislikes. You can actually download a Google Chrome extension, and you'll be able to see the YouTube dislikes. So that's what I've had for the past few months. But so we've identified that YouTube, although it's not perfect, it's so far the best alternative to mainstream media. But what I've noticed, especially throughout COVID, was that you just couldn't say words you couldn't say COVID, you couldn't say vaccine. And I think it's ridiculous that YouTubers have to censor themselves on a platform where they're supposed to be expressing themselves. So I think we shouldn't be settling for YouTube, even though it's great. I don't think that there should be, a right-wing alternative to YouTube. But I don't think YouTubers should be waiting until things get so bad that they just can't express themselves and there's no way out.
Does the panel think that mainstream media, particularly broadcast media, has got too narrow in its coverage, that they're always looking for something with a strong visual, whereas you've got YouTubers who've got much more breadth, you've got Maya raising the conservative WhatsApp messages, which don't have a strong visual in the past couple of days. And finally, do you think we should be paying for content which we don't want to watch?
But my apologies, my questions have already been asked because I was a little late. But a couple of elements, really. Number one, I don't know if you've addressed the fact that YouTube seems to have been shooting itself in the foot already, because you've got major content providers who are leaving YouTube because of the censorship. It's like Andrew Tate cleared off and got 130,000 viewers the first day for his first live stream. I think 300,000 people subscribed to Rumble straight away. Now, Andrew Tate says what Andrew Tate says, but he doesn't say anything illegal. And already, YouTube has moved so far to become the mainstream that it will not contend with anything that's remotely like controversial. When I mean controversial, I mean that YouTube is signed up to the Trusted News Initiative. The Trusted News Initiative is a shadowy organisation that the BBC fronts, that all of the main, like the 10 main social media companies already signed up to, along with all of the mainstream broadcast medias for all of Europe, North Africa, into the Middle East, like North America. That essentially, it's walked itself into a world where it's soft soap, like censorship, and delivering an on-message content.
Right, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to do final remarks from the panel, and then we'll wrap up. So start with Maya, then Tina.
Yes, I mean, when it comes to certain words, as you were saying, it's become difficult. And actually, a couple of other examples is you couldn't say feminism, even if you say I love feminism. You can't say war, even if you say I hate war, because context doesn't matter, apparently. But it all goes back to the fact that TV is narrow, and you just get 3 topics a day. But interaction actually does help. And that's why we exist, and that's why we're going to survive longer. Perfect example is there's a reason. OnlyFans is now more popular than your traditional porn websites, because people want that interaction. People want to feel that, that person is there. I'm talking to them. They're responding to me. Weird example, but there is a reason. There's a reason. OnlyFans and my 2C are doing well.
Thanks. Tina.
Okay, well, I mean, I know there's a session later on this afternoon on the online safety legislation, so I'm sure those of you who've raised questions in this session on that will no doubt want to get involved in that session. I mean, I would say in answer to all of that, I mean, I think the key point is, as far as content regulation is concerned, clearly there, as I've already said, there's regulation for broadcasters around impartiality and so on. But when it comes to what is proposed in the regulation that is coming forward, is that it's not about content, it's about ensuring systems and processes are in place in order to deal with the risks people associate with the internet. However, what is clearly very much concerning people, and which has not been properly resolved, is around any regulation of material which is legal but harmful, and where sort of the regulator will make the point clearly that it's not, it won't be possible for them to require any internet provider, YouTube or other, to take down material which is legal. It is nonetheless, I know, the area which is causing most people concern. So I think that's a debate still to be had. I mean, I would just point, I don't know, I thought that Maya was going to say on this question about YouTube and banning the word COVID, which I hadn't heard actually until today. That certainly wasn't from the government. However, there was certainly during the pandemic a relationship between YouTube, Google, and the governments in sort of the Western world to make sure that there was a ranking and people were pointed to websites or information which was supportive of the government's position on various different policies. And I'm not a spokesman for the government, though I should.
Lovely, thank you. And finally, Callum, and then we'll wrap up.
So many questions. But yeah, I mean, I'm obviously a free speech nut, and I do think, keeping something very regulated is quite damaging to free speech. And with the algorithm thing, I think YouTube algorithms are not that very advanced. I mean, it only picks up like certain keywords and it triggers an algorithm, and immediately that video is taken down, or it's demonetized before the even video is like actually started. So I think, of course, I don't want to see content which does breach on illegal grounds. If it's something that is obviously illegal, then there should be some regulatory form within that, and obviously context does matter, but overall, and I'll finish very soon, is it's very important that YouTube does keep bringing in more diverse views and loads of videos and that offer very wide political perspectives, not just the commentator expressing those opinions, but also interviewing people, going to parts of the world which are poorly represented in the media. All of that is good in trying to make a diverse media.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel, and thank you for all your questions.
you.